Hey friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I have with me of course, a very special friend, Dr. Paula Schmidt. Her professional background is in child psychology. She specializes in play therapy, but she also spent a good amount of time in the school system working with elementary age children as a school psychologist. Paula, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for inviting me. This is a new experience for me.
Well, I'm glad that you're even with us here today, because this has sort of been a long time coming. You know, if we could later do some sort of, overview of the room that we're in and your plethora of books that exist here, it's amazing. But Paula, what I wanted to focus on with you, and this is just going to be sort of an open discussion about your walk through your spiritual life, because I feel like you have a lot of knowledge that you've gathered throughout the years, starting from your childhood, what catapulted you into wanting to study in the Eastern philosophies, and learning about spiritualism, spiritism, and all different philosophies that kind of culminated into who you are right now. And I think there's just so much wealth of knowledge. But let's start at the beginning. How did you come into spirituality? What brought you to, being curious about it? And then maybe you could kind of give us some hints. If someone's new to spirituality, or if they're new in their spiritual walk, what are your recommendations? So let's start from the beginning. How did you even get into spirituality?
I like to think back on something my mother said, which was a surprise to me because I said this when I was 4 years old. Of course, I'd have to hear it from her later. I asked her why I could not be the Pope. So I think in that question there were two strains that were going to be evident in my life. One being spirituality, and the other being a woman, and what type of access I would have to jobs. The other early childhood story that still stays with me is my father was supposed to become a priest. So both of my parents were Catholic, my mother from the Italians, my father from the Germans. So to think that somehow in his family he was the one that the parents had the hope was going to become the priest, and then he winds up my father. So that's where I think I started. And then, of course, I was educated in Catholic schools. I like to tell my friends that the first time I sat in a classroom that did not have a crucifix on the wall was when I went to Johns Hopkins.
Wow.
So being a child psychologist, I always pay attention to those root years. And I'm very grateful that my childhood education was with the Visitation nuns. They were French, and they were really not supposed to teach. They were supposed to be cloistered and pray. But when they came to the United States, they needed to make money. So they opened some schools. And I will always credit my kindergarten teacher with being able to read me on a deep level.
Wow.
Because even though I came from a good family, she picked up on my sensitivity and some of my fears and sadness. But she also chose me to be Blessed Mother in the kindergarten play.
Oh.
So they're my early memories of spirituality. And the other story that comes to mind contributed to why I became a world traveler, because one of our activities at the Visitation was to collect money to send to the missions, because we were told there were children in India that needed to be baptized. So for $5, we would get a card with the name of some child in India, and we got to give them their baptismal name. So after I did that a couple times, I remember thinking, someday I want to go to India. I want to see the people that we were connected to through that activity.
And then from there, but at what point did you actually get a chance to start your trek through India? Was that sort of after you did your undergraduate or after your graduate school, you just felt like now is the time? Was there a moment or a series of moments where you felt like now is the time that I need to begin my spiritual journey? or was it just sort of, you know, the gray area where you began to read a little bit, and how was that experience for you?
Well, I think the spirituality kept growing through all the Catholic education. There was a Notre Dame nun. I went to Notre Dame High School here in the Baltimore area, and when we were doing a Bible study, she was very clear on telling us we did not need to take it literally. And I remember the girl sitting next to me spontaneously said, "You just popped my bubble," because I've always been reading the Bible as it is. So she was an influence. And then there was a teacher when I was at Notre Dame College who was teaching the death of God theology. And that teacher introduced me to existentialism. And we all went to a play called Waiting for Godot. And that whole play consisted of two men sitting under a tree waiting and having a conversation. So we could say it was waiting for God. So all of a sudden I was freed up, because then my imagination could fly. Existentialism really broadened me. And so in my college years, I went through my first personal crises. As my father had died when I was in high school and I was extremely close to him, I had a delayed reaction when I left to go to college in another city. So subsequently, I went through a major depression. Fortunately, I'm here to talk about it. It worked out, very challenging. But what came to me at the bottom of that depression was a phrase, not by my will, but thy will. So I have to attribute this profound love and connection and identity for being a spiritual being in a physical body with those kinds of experiences.
Wow.
It really saved me from the state of mind I was in. And I realized it didn't matter how I was feeling. It was my job to continue. So as I was finishing college, a friend of mine said, "How about meeting me in Europe next summer?" And I thought, whoa, why not? Because my family had traveled growing up. We had been to Canada and to the Bahamas and driven around a lot. So I joined her, and that was a amazing experience because I needed the space and freedom to learn about myself. So after that summer trip, I started as a social worker at Catholic Charities, but saved money, and I had some little inheritance from my father. And after the year was up, I went back to Europe with no agenda. Met a friend, and we went around together, and then I wound up in Morocco on the beach north of the Sahara, and that was a spiritual awakening for me.
Wow.
The people that gathered there were from all different countries, and what we talked about was spirituality. So I was introduced to Eastern philosophy. Some people there from England introduced me to some of the theosophists, and it was amazing. Here was a group of so-called hippies that were coming together on the beach because we were explorers, and yet what we were turning it into was like a spiritual salon.
Wow.
So out of that time period, I met a Dutchman, and he said, "Would you like to go to India?" And of course, if you remember my childhood experience, I said yes, much to the surprise and upset of my family, but I went. And in that overland drive from Amsterdam to Calcutta, not only did I grow up, but I was immersed in all these cultures and experiences. And two of the people riding with us were on their way to an ashram in India. So I really got an introduction to spirituality right in person. And I remember one time I couldn't find my boyfriend, and he wasn't necessarily spiritual at the time, but where was he? He was sitting under a tree with a man that had a long beard. He was a wandering sadhu, and they were having some kind of little conversation. So it was amazing the power of India to open people to spirituality.
What is a sadhu? I'm not that educated to know. So is that like a traveling wise
Yeah,
man?
he would be a holy
Okay.
man who's renounced, a renunciate. I guess, in the Catholic Church, they're supported in monasteries. But in the East, people support holy people. Just like they monks in certain monasteries have begging bowls, and the village always feeds them and takes care of them because they understand the importance of spirituality.
Wow. And from there, what was the most impactful? Was there something that was most impactful during that time? Was it your ride to Amsterdam where you really felt immersed in the culture? Or what other type of experience did you have that was like an aha kind of moment?
I think it was the culmination of the introduction to Hinduism and Buddhism, because part of my questioning growing up was, why do bad things happen to good people? Why are some people born very intelligent and other people not so intelligent? It just didn't make sense to me. And then I come across the doctrine of reincarnation. And I'm so excited. I say, I'm home. Like, why was this not taught in my Catholic education? And that's really why I needed to go to India.
Wow. That's pretty impactful. That was one of your major aha moments, was your reincarnation. And how did you come to learn about spiritualism or spiritism? Was that going from Eastern philosophy, studying Hinduism, Buddhism, where was that? How did that all transpire, I guess?
It's always interesting how one event that is not connected to spirituality might lead you into an experience. I have still a very close friend who moved to the West Coast when she married, and her husband had an eye problem, and he was being treated through a special doctor in Canada, and he was making progress. But then the suggestion was made that he should go to John of God in Brazil. So they went, and it was amazing, and they shared their story. And I said, well, I'm coping with a back problem. I did have a pretty serious back problem in my 40s. I'm happy to say that in my 60s it's not the same. So it's also good testament that yes, we can heal at any age. So they invited me to join them one Christmas, and fortunately it was the year in the school system where I could manage 2 weeks off with the permission of my boss. So I went to Abidjania, and as I was having this profound experience at John of God, somebody was reading a book here that we call No Solar, and I was curious. And so that was my introduction to Spiritism. And I think somebody else had the Medium's book. Although John of God does not identify itself as Spiritist, most of the practitioners there had a connection.
To Spiritism, okay. And so then, did you read the book No Solar or similar sort of books, and it kind of just sparked something within you, and you said, I want to find more groups like this? Like, how was that transition coming back from the States from John of God?
Well, I think different things were coming together. I had been studying mindfulness in Buddhism prior. It was like Catholicism was the first experience, then it was more Buddhism than Hinduism. And the gifts out of Buddhism was the mindfulness meditation, but also as a psychologist, a very clear description of how we are neurotic. So I always have called Buddha the first psychiatrist. However, I was missing what I had growing up, which was a group practice that I understood. When I would go to some local Buddhist groups, they were chanting in Tibetan, and I knew I wasn't going to master that language. So when I went to my first Spiritist meeting, I thought, great. Now I'm back in a Christian context, and it's metaphysical, so I've now married my two previous experiences.
Wow. Pretty powerful. I think that speaks volumes as someone, as yourself, who's studied a lot of Eastern philosophies and really able to come to sort of this culmination of like in Spiritism and in spiritualism and in spirituality, where you're like, I think I've found a sort of home for myself. Like, this stuff all kind of makes sense. And a lot of what Spiritism says, what spiritualism, Buddhism, a lot of it is similar. I mean, one of the things I think about Spiritism is that you could find a lot of the belief systems throughout the globe. The belief in reincarnation is not new. I think it's all over. It's a way that we can all kind of connect and talk about, and the need for spirituality. And I know in speaking with you a lot, learning about emotional intelligence, which also plays a huge role, spiritual intelligence and things like that. Obviously, you have that connection with the emotions as a psychologist. But Paula, through all of this, if you were talking to someone that was new in their journey, they're trying to find a starting point, what direction would you point them in? Would you say, okay, well, start reading this book or start this practice, maybe meditate? What direction? I guess it would also depend upon who you're talking to, and you probably would ask them a little bit more questions. But if someone asked you, well, Paula, I know that you have all these experiences. I want to start walking a spiritual journey, but I don't know where to begin. Where should I start?
I'd be happy to share books because of my love of books, and I know that's something mutual between us.
Yes.
I also think it's important to find some people. And since we're saying it's more the experience of learning with a group of people, that could be a Spiritist group, it could be a Unitarian church, that could be a Buddhist Sangha where you did walking meditation. Okay. Because learning these concepts that are universal, they can come through different religious practices. And I think a lot of people now have maybe shied away from religion because they're still recovering, so to speak, from the dogmas and how they viewed it growing up. And they believe in spirituality and they want to identify with it. And that's when your question comes in. But I really think you need to somehow find a practice. Reading will continue to nourish you, but really it's in that group setting where you learn more and you share more and you build your spirituality through connection with other people. And then we can follow the Dalai Lama's religion, which is kindness. And again, you don't have to be in a group, but I really think the group, whether it's learning how to meditate or even prayer, it will be more powerful for you when you share it with someone. And if you're not near any of those, I would say talk to some of your friends and create a spiritual group at home. There is one already established through the Edgar Cayce Foundation. It's called God at Home. Oh, wow. And when you contact the Edgar Cayce, its Association for Research and Enlightenment, you can get the study guides for God at Home, books 1 and 2. Wow. So already there you are, wherever you are.
I love it. Paula, thank you so much. I feel like we should have, some weekly chats and discussions with your plethora of knowledge. This is just the beginning. So we will link down under the video, under the description box, links to a lot what Paula was just referencing to ARE and things of that nature, maybe some books of meditation, as well as to understand what is Spiritism, because if some of you are asking, well, what is it? You mentioned a word, we didn't go into it. It's not the point of this discussion here today, but it will be linked down in the description box. Do not forget to comment, like, and share this video if you enjoyed it, or if you know other people that are curious or are wondering more about it. And let us know if you'd like to see any particular subject in general. If not, guys, until next time, namaste and God bless you. Bye-bye.